Everybody, welcome. My name is Bennett Tchaikovsky, and today we're going to be looking at relevant costs for making decisions. First one we're going to be looking at today is selling something or processing this further. So really quickly, my disclaimer and copyright notice, the information and opinions in this presentation are those of myself and not my employers or other affiliated organizations, including the South Orange County Community College District and Irvine Valley College. The presentation is for educational purposes only and does not constitute any legal or accounting advice whatsoever. This presentation is copyright 2008 to 2024 by Bennett Tchaikovsky. All rights are reserved. Any distribution is strictly prohibited. Presentations from time to time will use information from third parties, third-party information. The third-party information is property of those respective copyright holders, and I do not make any claim to that third-party information. So let's go ahead and take a look over here. We're kind of through that. So we're now looking over here at our first question. We're going to be looking at, should we be selling something or processing it further? So when we look at this question right over here, we basically have a situation where we've got SFO has acquired 3 airplanes that it purchased for 900,000 2 years ago. For 90,000, excuse me, 2 years ago. The airplanes can be sold as is for $150,000 each. However, if I spend 200,000 on each plane to update each plane can then be sold for $500,000 each. The time to update each plane would be approximately 8 to 9 months. Based on the above, prepare a quantified analysis as to whether or not the plane should be sold or processed further. So as we look at this particular question, there's a very important distinction, meaning that I am not required to go through and to deliver a finished product. When we look at another question a little bit later, we're going to see something which is going to be called scrap and build new or rework. This is very different. This is, should we sell it now or should we process it further? So let's take a look at this first scenario. So the fact that I acquired 3 airplanes that I purchased for 90 grand 2 years ago, this is really going to be a sunk cost, right? It's something I paid for it. It's really not relevant to the current decision now, which is really, should I sell the planes as is, or should I process them further? So coming over here and taking a look at this, if I sell as is, right, what exactly am I going to get? Well, I'd have a sales price of 150,000. The thing you need to pay attention to is going to be, this is 150,000 each. So for each plane, I'm going to get 150,000. So my sale price and my planes over here is going to be a total of 450,000. So if I sell as is, I'm going to make 450. The 90,000 again is not relevant to our decision right now. That was a sunk cost. We already spent the money. So that's not really what I'm going to be thinking about here. However, if I decide to update the planes, my sales price I'll be able to sell these for $500,000 each. Okay, this is going to be for 3 planes. So by selling the planes, if I update them, I will make 1.5 million. However, this does not come free. My cost to update the plane is going to be 200,000. And I have 3 of these planes. So my net profit as a result of updating the planes is going to be 900,000. If I look at this, just kind of like it seems to be initially this seems to be a no-brainer, right? Wow. I'm making roughly the profit basically here. I'm essentially doubling my money, right? Or I'm now making 450,000. So I would probably say in this case, it would be best to update the planes. However, I want to be careful before I say this. So over here is the time to update each plane will take approximately 8 to 9 months. So this is not as certain as I think it would be, right? I have to kind of basically say over here is that will I be able in 8 to 9 months to get a price of 1.5 million or 500,000 per plane, right? Are the costs, especially right now where we still have some inflation, will the cost to update remain 200,000 per plane? When we think about this over here, like this amount is certain. However, this amount over here is a projection. It's uncertain. We're not getting it immediately. So what I'm going to have to go through and do is, do I trust the people or the individuals that are giving me guidance in terms of these numbers? Do these look to be correct? And so when you're going through and doing a seller process further, if there is a time element involved that might be significant, you want to kind of go through and do your diligence. Who is the person who is telling me this information? I tell a lot of my students that I have no personal reason to lie to you about anything. However, I am half attorney. So I'm not saying there's no reason why I would lie to you about going through and teaching, but I'm not going to be perfect. And you really need to go out and do some diligence on your own. Who are you dealing with? Right? So if you're hiring a CPA, is there a way we can check to see if somebody has their CPA license? Sure. Or hiring an attorney, is there a way I can go through and look up someone's law license? Sure. If I'm hiring a broker or an investment advisor, can I go to finra.org and look up the broker that I'm trying to go through over here, right? So investor tools and calculators, can I figure out who is giving me advice? Do they have any marks against them? So when I'm going through and looking at this, I have to have someone that I know and I trust before I go through and do this. What I want you to think about too is that if you've ever watched the TV show Pawn Stars, right? What Rick is always worried about when he buys something and he wants to resell it, what he's always concerned about is that how much profit is he going to make? So if he buys something that needs repair and he wants to fix it up and sell it, is he still going to be able to make a profit? And that's really where this whole analysis here comes into. So assuming that I'll be able to get the 500 grand, that the cost will be okay, I would probably go through here and say, well, we're achieving additional 100% profit, or 450 divided by 450, right? Thus, we would basically over here is we would process further. And again, this is assuming we have gone through and we've done our diligence and we're comfortable with what we're being shown here. Okay. So let's take a look at this one down over here. So assume the same facts as above. However, with respect to the planes, after updating, can only be sold for 380,000 each. So what I'm selling this plane for as is not going through and changing, right? But what is changing is I'm only able over here to get 380,000 per plane. Would I continue to go through and do it again? Same facts as above. So I basically, if I sell it as is, I'll get $450,000 without hesitation. But now, if I update the planes, I'm not getting as much money. So now, basically, by looking at this, I'm only making an additional 90,000. And it's going to take risk, by the way, too. And I forgot to mention this. When we choose to update the planes, it's going to cost me $600,000. So I'm going to be out of pocket by 600,000. So do I have the financing available for that? I'm going to have to pay interest on that loan over that period of time. And so over here, when we're looking at this, well, it's 90,000 additional profit. However, how much more is that as a percentage? If I take 90,000 divided by 450,000, this amount here is roughly 20% more than what I would be getting over here for selling this immediately. Okay. So again, how did I come up with that? Right. Well, if I take the difference between 90,000, or if this is 540,000 minus 450,000, so I make 90,000 additional profit if I update the planes. However, right, in terms of like additional profit, right, this is giving me about 20% more profit. And this is what we have to think about. Well, if it's going to be between 6 to 8 months to go through and to build, or excuse me, 8 to 9 months to go through and build the planes, well, if I have to go out and borrow money, assuming I could get it at 10% right over here, and this would basically be a loan for the 600 grand to go through and build the planes. And then at the same time, I would also have to kind of consider, well, we got this 10% here on the loan, but I would only be doing it for 9/12. That's an additional $45,000. That's about half of my profit. So when you're going through and looking at this, you really want to make sure to consider all of the different factors, right? To update the planes, it's going to cost me $600,000 to update that. Do I have the capital to do so? Now, what's interesting is one of my students actually said this today. He said, well, why don't you sell one of the planes? And then that could kind of fund this over here. Sell one of the planes as is and go from there, which he's absolutely correct. So, but for my purposes in terms of this exam, what I'm really going to be looking for my students to kind of go through and do is to prepare this analysis. Remember, most important thing, this is a sunk cost, this 90 grand right over here. This is going to be a sunk cost, right? So this is a sunk cost, and we do not consider it in our analysis. So in any event, I want to thank you for being with me here today. Thank you for watching. If you have any comments or you would like to see me do other videos, please feel free to email me at 1812cpa@gmail.com. Have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video. Have a great one.